Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metza. We hope you got through Halloween okay and are getting ready for the snows, which will eventually fall. But boy, what a beautiful Indian summer we've all enjoyed. I have a woman that's been on the airwaves in the Twin Cities for over 20 years. She also performs as Mother Banjo, but as the host of the KFAI Woman Folk Radio Show, we have Ellen Stanley, who's going to be presenting a great lineup of female performers celebrating the 20th anniversary of Woman Folk, November 20th at the gorgeous Parkway Theater, with musicians such as Anne Reed, Molly Mayer, Jonathan Brooke, Mary Cotterfellow, and she'll tell us about the rest. So, Ellen, how are you tonight?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Paul.
Well, it's great to have you on. I know you're a busy woman. I know we might have a cameo by your son at some point.
Yeah.
What's your son's name? How old is he?
Yeah, Stanley. He is 3.5, and he's just, full of energy and is working on his radio voice.
Well, there's no time like the present. So, Ellen, we're going to jump all over this interview to get a little background on yourself. Let's start first with, how did Women Folk Radio Show start on KFAI 20 years ago?
Well, it's had a long history on KFAI, which, as you know, KFAI Community Radio, volunteer-run station in Minneapolis. They've always had a mission of amplifying voices that don't get enough airtime and attention on mainstream media. So there's always been a lot of women's programming, and Women Folk started probably at least 13 years before I even moved to the Twin Cities, which was in 2001. And Catherine Azor-Minda was a host of that show and did a beautiful job with it. And when she was getting ready to move to Boston, I was getting involved with the station around that time and had subbed for the show, and she encouraged me to apply to take over that show, and I did, and because I had done radio in college, did a women's programming in college, and I got the show, and now it's been 20 years later, and I'm still doing it.
Wow.
So it's a lot of fun.
Well, congratulations. I can't say enough about KFAI, whether it was my band Cats Under the Stars that played a live show at KFAI back when they broadcasted from the Walker Church in South Minneapolis, and my first record that came out in '84. They've been such a friend of independent musicians like ourselves. And I remember years ago when I was going down to play in Austin, Texas, they also, you probably know, of the great station down there, KUT, that broadcasts out of the University of Texas, right on the Austin campus, right down the hallway from Austin city limits. And I brought there was a fella, great DJ named Larry Monroe down there who became a very good friend of mine. And I brought him down a poster, one of the posters that they gave as a giveaway if you would donate in one of the membership fund drives for KFAI. And it was a picture of a variety of people on there, all races, creeds, and religions. And it said, the tagline on the poster was, "We have shows we don't even like."
That sounds about right. And that's certainly, KFAI has been such a big part of my life since moving to the Twin Cities. Even before I started hosting Women Folk, I started volunteering as soon as I moved to town. And it's how so many of my important personal friendships, as well as professional ones, have come through KFAI. Either people, fellow DJs, musicians I've met just from being in the studios and from hosting the show. So it's, and I think I first met you, Paul, I believe, when you were on maybe Bob Feldman's show or something like that. So
that could have very well been, yes. There's I listened to, of course, it was probably a little before your time, but I'm sure you've heard of the Lazy Bill Lucas show, the great blues piano player. And then the great Willie Murphy, another great blues piano player, took that over. And so when I first moved to town, I listened to the Lazy Bill show. And then, of course, I forget what night it was, but when Willie Murphy hosted it. And then, like a lot of, for those of you that heard the Bob Dylan's theme time radio hour. Or
Mm-hmm.
lucky enough, way back in the day, to hear Peter Wolf of the Jay Giles Band back when he was a DJ in the 60s, or Oscar Brand in New York City, the great folk singer with his
Yes.
radio show. There's a real nice connection with musicians that do radio shows.
Yeah, I think, and I wasn't even playing out music really. I mean, I was a musician, but I wasn't playing publicly or playing my own songs out when I first started hosting Women Folk. But I think you're right. I think what's special about community stations like KFAI and where you're at is that, like, the expertise and the passion for the music and the relationships that we have because we're in the music scene, I think make the radio shows more rich. And I certainly also keep learning about the music scene by hosting the show. So I think it's a nice circle of listeners and fans and musicians kind of coming together to spread the gospel of good music, you know?
You're exactly right, Ellen Stanley. And now when I'm thinking about Willie Murphy, who I think about quite a bit, actually. And the cool thing about Willie's show was you were listening to Willie Murphy's records. He would bring a stash of his own personal collection to hear, and he just had such a great vibe. Now you had, let's talk a little bit about how Ellen Stanley came and ended up in the Twin Cities.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New England, in New Haven area of Connecticut, southern Connecticut. And but I went to college in Ohio. I went to Oberlin College, and that's where I got involved with radio, hosting a weekly show on WOBC. And that's kind of where I really immersed myself in folk music of all different varieties and flavors. And then so while I was a student, I got really into promoting other people's music. Again, I wasn't really performing out, but I was just a big fan. And started a folk festival and interned with a couple record labels. And I had met Bob Feldman, who founded Red House Records and, you know, was based in St. Paul and hosted a show on KFAI. I met him through that work of promoting the folk festival and booking a bunch of Red House artists. So I met him then, and I actually interviewed with him for a job when I was still a senior in college. And I was looking at moving to the Twin Cities. And the timing didn't work out. He needed a publicist right then, and I hadn't graduated yet. But we stayed in touch, and I ended up moving to the Twin Cities anyway, just because I liked the music scene and the vibe, and it was affordable at the time.
Yeah, right.
And so I moved out here and just, again, got involved with the music scene right away, and KFAI was probably the biggest part of that. Later, I did end up working for Red House Records, but I had a couple jobs before then. But again, Bob Feldman and I ended up being radio neighbors, so we'd always exchange records and share notes about shows we had seen. And then he was like, "When are you going to work for me at Red House Records?" And I said, "When you offer me a job." And you know, eventually the timing worked out, and I did. But again, it's just another example of KFAI being a connection point for me in the local and national music scene. And I think it continues to be that, hopefully for listeners as well, that people always say, "Oh, I went to that show because I heard you play that one song." And that, nothing makes me more happy than that. If I can encourage people to not just discover new music, but then actually support it by, you know, paying to go to shows and buying people's records. That's how the music is going to continue. So people ask me, you know, how long are you going to keep doing Women Folk, since I volunteer to do this job every week? And I say, well, as long as either, you know, KFAI wants me and there's, you know, an audience for the music, and as long as I'm having fun and I'm not bored, because there's so much good new music and of course great old records to play, but I never get bored. You know, there's always new artists coming in on the scene or that I discover in my travels. So so far I think it's gonna maybe be another 20 years, but we'll see.
Well, good for you. And of course we're talking with Ellen Stanley, who also performs as Mother Banjo. We're talking about a great show celebrating 20 years of Women Folk on the air on KFAI. November 20th, doors at 6 p.m., shows at 7 p.m. at the Parkway Theater up there, 40th something in Chicago. Speaking of great musicians you can discover, one of my things that I brag about over the years, back when I was just moved to Northeast Minneapolis, I was working with Jeff Maritko, who ran Maze and back then there wasn't a lot of bands in Northeast Minneapolis that didn't have an accordion player. Well, Jeff and I started to get some great musicians, including a young band out of Duluth called Trampled by Turtles. Another young guitar player out of Duluth did his Twin Cities debut at my artist corner that I did on Tuesday nights by the name of Charlie Parr. And there was another young woman I met, and we've talked about this, and so she will admit to it. I gave her her first quote-unquote professional gig, live show at Maze Lax in 1997. She's going to be performing at your show at the Parkway. Let's hear something by the most lovely Molly Mayer. All right, we just listened to Molly Mayer, and you're listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metza. Ellen Stanley, let's talk a little about Molly Mayer because she is so damn good.
Yeah, I know. She's like an amazing guitar player, which is kind of how I think a lot of people first kind of heard her. She's also a great songwriter and singer, has, led her own great bands, but also she's a great curator, too, of the Twin Cities music scene. She has run a lot of great concert series, one that she used to do at James J. Hill Library in St. Paul. She's done the, Lower Town Guitar Festival. She's booked stuff at Como Park. She just really is tapped into not just the local music scene, but what's coming up nationally, brought in a lot of artists from Texas and other parts of the country. And so that's something that I really love about Molly. Is she also is very community minded, has great taste, and she's just a fiery guitar player. So I was really, and she was one of those artists that I discovered pretty early on after moving here, playing at some Irish bar, and her and Eric Koskinen, and I just was blown away. And I've known her probably ever since then, So one of my big goals with this show was to showcase a variety of different styles of songwriters that have been a part of the show, and it had a long history of the show, and also different generations of artists. So trying to have some young artists like the OK Factor, which is this great young string duo, all the way up through, legends like Ann Reed and everyone in between. So that was kind of one of the goals of putting up this lineup, because of course there's a million great artists that if I had unlimited time, I would love to showcase as part of this. But for me, this was more of a personal roster of artists that I've loved and have been a big part of the show over the years.
Yes, and the other great thing about Molly is over the years she's worked on and off at Willie's Guitar in St. Paul, and I bumped into somebody just within the last couple of months who had a great Martin guitar, and I said, "Where did you get that?" And they said, "Molly Mayer suggested I buy this when I went into Willie's." So she wears so many hats, and they're all really cool and groovy.
And I have to tip my hat to Molly too, because although I don't play guitar, I play the banjo. I was in Willie's one time, and I was looking just for a DI box, and Molly happened to be working that day, and I was like, I just need something good where I can do some basic EQ on my banjo, but it doesn't have to be fancy, I don't need pedals or whatever. And she said, "Oh, get a bag. Those are great." And she's like, "Actually, Charlie Parr just brought this one in the other day."
Oh, cool!
So I ended up buying this DI box that had been Charlie's, and it's the only box I've ever owned. And I like to think it has some of that Charlie Parr and Molly Mayer mojo on it.
Oh, well, it certainly does. I believe in that. In fact, I was so happy to see a couple of weeks ago on Facebook where the great Everybody's God who loves folk music in the Twin Cities and around America, the world's greatest living folk singer next to Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Spider John Kerner, gave one of his guitars to Charlie Parr, a real passing of the baton, and I can't think of a better guy to get that than Mr. Parr. So let's talk a little bit about Mother Banjo, your banjo playing, and when did you start playing banjo, Ellen Stanley, and when did you start performing?
Well, that also came with my move to the Twin Cities. It was kind of around the same time I started at KFAI. So moving to Minneapolis has been big in my life in lots of ways, and has shaped my music and my work. But yeah, I had kind of fallen in love with the banjo in college And I've been a musician my whole life, sang, wrote, but like I never really took up a guitar as a piano player. And it wasn't till I was like, I really need to pick up a string instrument to write the kind of music I want to write and be able to play without having to enlist another musician, because I didn't really know players in town when I moved to town. So I was way more interested in the banjo than the guitar. And I thought, there's a million mediocre guitar players, but there aren't a million mediocre banjo players. So most of the banjo players you know of are like really good,
Right.
Hot pickers. And so and also it was at the time, especially when I started, there weren't certainly a lot of kind of songwriting banjo players. There were like banjo players, and there were, but not people who use it as an accompaniment instrument. So, but I really loved the tenor of the banjo, and I just was like, I don't need to play guitar, I'll just pick up the banjo. So I went to Homestead Pick and Parlor in Richfield and bought a banjo and took lessons there. And so I started that a couple years after I moved to town. I moved to town in 2001, and then quickly I learned some John Prine songs, and then quickly started writing my own songs. And probably 2007, I put out my first record under Mother Banjo.
Well, that's fantastic. And as long as we're talking John Prine, one of my pet projects that I started a couple of years ago, John Prine, of course, was a legendary mailman before he became a legendary songwriter. And I had this idea after John passed away, there'd be nobody as a fitting tribute to get his own United States Postal Service stamp than John Prine. So those of you that agree with me, go to johnprinestamp.com and sign. We've got almost 4,000 signatures. When we get to 10,000, we're going to present it to the USPS. And all you need is 3 years from a person's passing to get a stamp. So johnprinestamp.com. Of course, Ellen Stanley, tell your friends and connects on that. And,
I will. I'm a big Prine fan, so that will definitely happen.
And all of the packages I've been sending out for the last several weeks have come adorned with Pete Seeger stamps. So I'm a big believer in the United States Postal Service, and I love those commemorative stamps. You know what? Even though you're not going to be playing at the 20th anniversary of Women Folk, as long as we're talking Mother Banjo, let's play a Mother Banjo song. What would you suggest right now, Ellen Stanley, would you like us to hear?
Well, yeah, speaking of John Prine, I just released a cover of a John Prine song. That's my newest single. It's called Morning Train.
Then we are going to listen to that and then back for the rest of the show on the Wall of Power Radio Hour with the great Ellen Stanley. Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metza. And I'd like to remind you, my new book is out. Go to paulmetza.com and get your copy of Alphabet Jazz, Poetry, Prose, Stories, and Songs on Amazon. Get a lot, buy for your friends for the holidays. Ellen Stanley, you wear a lot of hats, and I'm proud to say you and I have worked on several projects. You're a music publicist, and you do a phenomenal job. But tell us about working for Bob Feldman and Red House Records and what you learned from that experience.
Well, I learned so much from that experience. I was a huge fan of Red House. It was like my favorite record label. And so long before I moved to town, it was one of the reasons I moved to Twin Cities was because of Red House Records. And so getting to know Bob Feldman, and Red House was such a family, like the staff, the artists, and Bob really curated that and cultivated that atmosphere. And most people who worked for the label, and most people who ended up recording on the label, their relationship with Bob predated their official connection to the label, whether it was being hired or signed to the label. And so as a result, it really was a family. And so when Bob hired me, I already had known him for a while, and of course I knew all the artists. And he really tended to hire people who shared the passion for the music and mission for the work of spreading music. And even though it was a for-profit label, we always joked it was a low profit, not a no profit label, but it had that mission sense about it, right? That we're around to we're here because we love the music and we believe in it and we think it should have an audience. And the goal, Bob's goal, was always make sure that artists can make a living doing what they're doing. And so, and that really filtered down to every part of what we did at Red House. So I learned a lot from that. And of course, also just Bob's great taste and working with that great team of people, all of whom are still close friends. You know, we lost Bob several years back, but the folks that I worked with at Red House remain really close, and I've gotten to work with them in a variety of capacities, which has been really great. So,
well, and you guys, I was the recipient of some really great happy hours you used to have over there. I don't know if it was just kind of over the holidays, but who's that
no,
great?
every Friday. Every Friday. That happened after. It happened after Bob passed, and we had hired a bunch of new staff around the same time, and there was just a sense of wanting community and to get, cultivate that team, because Bob was kind of the ringleader, and after Bob left, we just really wanted to make sure we maintained that spirit. So every Friday we'd have a happy hour around 4:30, and sometimes artists would come in, or just local music people, or people touring through town, and it was just a lovely community thing. And I think that's what I learned most from my time at Red House, aside from the nuts and bolts of the music industry and PR work, was really how to cultivate community, because that's what keeps this music going, and that's really what motivates everything I do.
That is a really great way to wrap up a lot of things we're talking about. Who was the guy? He came, I met him back when I was booking Famous Dave's Barbecue and Blues. He worked for a blues label in Chicago, and then he came up.
Luke Welsh.
Luke
Welsh.
Yeah.
He worked for Roof Records, and he was so amazing. And he was a big part of that happy hour spirit.
Oh, he was a great mixologist. That guy could rock and roll on the booze and cocktails. How many records did Red House put up, and where did the catalog end up?
Oh, I can't remember what the last number I worked on, because when I left in 2013 to run the Minnesota Music Coalition, I can't remember what number. We were past 200, I think,
wow,
in terms of, item catalog number, I believe. But I don't know how high it got up before it got sold. Red House still exists, but it got bought out by Compass Records, another wonderful indie label out of Nashville that's run by banjo player Allison Brown. So they bought it, and so now it's based in Nashville, not in St. Paul. But that catalog is still there, so you can still find stuff if you go to redhouserecords.com or through the Compass Records website.
Great. Now, I was just reading something yesterday where I have a good friend of mine who loves the Avett Brothers, and I don't know that much about their music, but one of the guys in the band is just releasing a record of all of Greg Brown music. And of course, Red House Records and Bob Feldman, his love of Greg Brown, got that label started. So, and who doesn't love Greg Brown? But does Greg, I've been kind of out of touch. I met him, he was really good friends with Prudence Johnson, who was a good friend of mine in the mid-'80s. So I'd see Greg a lot when he played in town. Then he went out and became one of America's greatest folk singers. Is Greg still playing?
He only periodically. He's basically kind of retired, but he is playing a few farewell shows this winter. They've coaxed him out of retirement to play a few. He's playing at the Cedar Cultural Center in December, actually, in Minneapolis. So
really?
I already got my tickets for that.
Beautiful. Well, he is just, he wrote a song called The Poet's Game that is just, if you're a songwriter or a lifer musician, you are going to relate to all of the lyrics in that song. So we've got a few more minutes here with Ellen Stanley. Tell us some more about who's performing on November 20th at the Parkway Theater, 20th anniversary of your Woman Folk radio show. I know we've got Ann Reed, Molly Mayer, Jonathan Brooke, Mary Cutchfield. Who else?
Well, we mentioned Molly Mayer, also Becky Schlegel.
Oh, Becky's great.
Talent. She's coming up from Rochester, one of my favorite songwriters and singers. Also, Ellis Delaney. Ellis has been a part of Women Folk for a long time, and she'll be there. And the OK Factor, this great string duo who have collaborated with Ellis, and they definitely are kind of the youngest generation, but ever since they've moved to town, they've been a fixture on my show in various capacities. So I'm really excited that they're a part of the show. So it's going to be great. There'll probably be some other surprises, but mainly it'll just be a great night of music and community, and all the proceeds are going to benefit KFAI. So it's a good cause, and it's just going to be a fun night of music. And it starts at 7 p.m. It will be done by a reasonable time because it's a Sunday night. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Ellen Stanley, I give, not unlike Molly Mary, you wear a lot of different hats in our musical community, and I love that your son is giving us enough space here to do this interview. What was it? Did you say his name was Sam?
Stan.
Stan,
actually.
Okay.
He has my last name as his first name. So.
Oh, yeah, right. Perfectly. Well, great. Well, Ellen Stanley, best of luck on your Womenfolk 20th anniversary. Keep it going for at least 20 more years. I think what we are going to do is end up with a number by Jonathan Brooke, who I had on my radio show about 6 weeks ago. And we'll do a song by her that just happened to be the name of my high school band, called Damn Everything But the Circus. Ellen Stanley, thank you so much, and your alter ego mother, Banjo, and I look forward to hearing about a very successful show at the Parkway 20th anniversary of Womenfolk Radio on November 20th. All proceeds go to KFAI. Good work, Ellen.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's enough for a reason.
Thanks for listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. The show is produced by Paul Metza, engineered by John Yellow Cloud Rising Saristo. We'd like to thank our guest, Ellen Stanley. And I've got some great news. If you're looking for something fun to read or a Christmas gift for somebody you love, my book, Alphabet Jazz, Poetry, Prose, Stories, and Songs, is now available on Amazon.com. If you dig it, family, dogs, music, personalities, and crazy stories, you're going to love that book. And like my dad used to tell me, remember to be kind and make someone happy.